Today I've got for you guys the up-to-date best settings for BattleBit Remastered on PC to achieve the highest FPS possible whilst also maintaining maximum visibility of all enemies in all scenarios. Even though this game is graphically very simple, there are some really important tweaks I'm going to cover today that you might not know about that really push that visibility to the max and enable you to win more gunfights at range. Custom resolution, keep this off. We're just going to run the game at our native resolution. For me, that's 1440p. You guys just need to pick whatever your native resolution is. Screen mode, you need to make sure it's on exclusive full screen, not full screen window. I know a lot of people like full screen window because it means they can alt tab and multitask a little quicker, but running exclusive full screen gives you the lowest input latency possible and the maximum amount of resource dedicated from your PC to the game while it's running. And speaking of multitasking, if you're the kind of person who likes to browse the internet while you're gaming and it's causing your system to lag, then you need to try out Opera GX, today's video sponsor. Opera GX is the browser built by gamers for gamers that's packed full of features that traditional browsers just don't offer. The switch over to Opera GX is made so easy using their import tool. It brings over all of your bookmarks and extensions from browsers like Chrome in just a couple of clicks. There's also full integration with platforms like Twitch, Discord, TikTok, and other messengers, so you can log into your accounts, easily see when your favorite streamers are online, and keep up to date with your communities and messages. And if all that sounds good, just wait till you can see all the customization options with GX mods. Want to theme your entire browser around your favorite game? It's easy. Just pick one of the many mods available in the GX store, customize it how you like, custom sounds, backgrounds, and shaders. Just give this a listen. I'd probably say the most underrated feature of the browser is GX Corner. Stay up to date with free games, the best deals, and any breaking gaming news, all in one easily accessible place. As an example, I can see right here that For Honor, a game I'm actually quite interested in playing, is free to play right now on Steam. I might have never known that without GX Corner. Honestly, guys, it is time to break up with your current outdated browser and move on over to Opera GX. There's a link in the description that you can click to go and download it and try it out. For screen scale, this is the percentage of your resolution that you've selected up here that you're actually rendering the game out. So for example, if I was to turn this down to 25% and apply, the game suddenly looks horrifically blurry and pixelated because essentially I'm running the game at a quarter resolution. Now, in most games, I usually just recommend that you run this at 100, but because this game is so easy to run for most people, I'd recommend you turn this up to a minimum of 125%. This is just going to give you some really nice extra sharpening. It's going to remove some of those jagged edges around objects. If you're feeling a little bit more daring and you've got a really nice system and you want to try it out, I've actually been running this at 150 and getting an even sharper image. It just makes spotting enemies at those really long ranges that much better. A lot of people will just overlook this and not do it. It's a really important setting to change, so give this a shot. Vertical sync, you definitely want to make sure this is off. What this setting is actually doing is it is limiting your FPS to the refresh rate of your monitor. So for me, I would be limited at 240 FPS because I have a 240 Hz monitor. It's meant to help with screen tearing, which can be annoying in certain games, but it adds a lot of input latency. So you definitely want to make sure you turn it off. Then max FPS, I would honestly recommend, especially for this game, which can run at some pretty crazy FPS, just pull it all the way to the right, 1400. That's essentially unlimited. You're probably not actually going to be hitting that, but it just gives your game as much breathing room as possible to get the maximum performance in every scenario that we run into. For your brightness, I'd recommend you turn this up to 125. The default of 100 can be quite dark on a lot of the darker maps and the woodland maps, so this extra little bit of brightness, once again, it just helps spot those enemies at ranges, especially against some of those darker backgrounds. For your field of view, it's slightly personal preference, but you definitely want to be at a minimum of probably 105. This is just going to give you way more information. You can see here, I can still see enemies right at the periphery of my vision, where if I was on a lower FOV, enemies would essentially be able to hide off screen from me, and you always need to have your head on a swivel in this game. I've actually been running at 120 for a bit as well, trying this out. Sometimes this can make those far enemies just a bit too far away though, so a happy medium, something around 105 to 110, I think works pretty well. Next up, vehicle FOV. This is one where you want to turn this all the way up. I don't think I've got any vehicles in the training area to show you, but when you're in a vehicle, you want as much vision as possible. We don't really care about spotting enemies as much at long distance. We just care about having as much information as possible. So maximum vehicle FOV, very important. Screen shake. get rid of this. Turn this all the way off to 0. It makes the game a bit more immersive, I guess, when your screen's shaking from things happening around you. Really feels like you're in a war, but it's overall distracting. It ruins your visibility overall as well, so we want to turn it all the way off. Moving down to shadows, this is going to be a little bit of a controversial one. I'll give you two options. The first one is to just completely turn off your shadows by clicking the tick box here to get rid of them. When you do this, you don't need to worry about shadow resolution or shadow distance because you don't have any shadows. What this is going to do is remove all the shadows from every object in the game, and it's especially good for seeing inside of buildings. Look at how light it is in there now as opposed to when I turn on the shadows, and you'll see suddenly that room is a lot darker and it'll be a lot harder to see enemies. However, I know a lot of people do like to keep shadows on because it just adds a bit more depth, it adds a bit more immersion. I can completely understand that. If you do want to leave them on, I would recommend that you turn down your shadow resolution to 512, and then you can leave the shadow distance at 100. So they're your two options. Either have it on with this config, or like I do, turn them off if you want that maximum visibility and being able to spot enemies in those previously dark areas. Then we've got anti-aliasing. What this does is remove the jagged edges from objects. It might not be that easy to see on this recording, but you can see sort of edges here. Edges of buildings are slightly shimmering, slightly jagged. Luckily, because we turned up that screen scale up here, we actually lose a bit of the jaggedness, which is why I highly recommend you do this. However, to really smooth the game out, because once again, we can afford to lose a little bit of FPS here, I would recommend that you move this on up to SMAA low. Avoid the FXAA options. These all blur the game a horrific amount, and I don't like it at all. But the SMAA low option just provides a little bit of extra softness to those edges and removes a little bit of the distraction. Imagine an enemy peeking from up on top of this building. With anti-aliasing off, those blocks up there can shimmer a little bit more. It makes it a little bit harder to see. With that SMAA on at low, I can definitely see a little easier, so I think it's definitely worth it. Destruction quality, I definitely like to leave this at ultra. When we're starting to blow holes in the side of buildings or buildings are coming down, it's very important that we have a true idea of the lay of the land and what the gaps in buildings are, how we're going to progress in. And when you start turning down this destruction quality, you start losing a lot of that detail. It's kind of hard to describe in this video, but trust me, leave this on ultra if you don't want to run into any weird situations while you're playing. LOD, or level of detail quality, is a setting which we want to leave as high as possible, ideally not turning it down from 400. This is essentially determining what level of detail things are rendered in at long distances, and also whether they're rendered in at all. You can see here we've got the range in front of us with bots right down the end and a wall behind them. If I bring this all the way down to 0, which you'll think, yes, it's going to give me loads of FPS, well, suddenly things aren't even rendering in at distance. The quality of the enemies are so low, it's hard to even tell there's an enemy there, apart from the fact there's a number above his head. So it's a really important setting to keep at 400 if you can. I would say the lowest I would let you guys go on this would maybe be 200. Any lower than that and you're going to start having problems doing anything at longer distance in BattleBit. Number of lights, I haven't found what this really does. It comes default at 4, which is the lowest, and the game looks absolutely fine. I've tried turning this up to 8 and nothing seems to happen, so just leave it at 4. Rain quality, I would just turn this to low. This will only actually affect you on maps where it's raining, and I found that the rain looks pretty similar on all of the settings. You just gain a little bit more performance by having this on the lowest, so yeah, chuck it down there. Render distance goes hand in hand with level of detail quality. However, I have found that you can probably pull this as low as maybe 2,500 and things still are rendering in decently. So if you find that helps your FPS at all, you can bring it down here. Me, and for most people, because this game does run pretty well on most systems, you can just leave this at 4,000 and always have as much stuff rendered in at distance to get as much information as possible. Next is shader quality, a setting that I keep seeing people recommend that you put on low to gain loads of FPS, but you shouldn't be doing that. This will really limit your visibility, specifically in buildings without much texture to them. Let me explain. If I set this to low right now and I run up these stairs, this is probably a good place to sort of show how this is working, and I look down the stairs here, obviously you know it's a set of stairs, but when I look, there is no separation between each of those steps. It looks like one solid texture. This same idea translates to when we're in a building, and certain buildings have very little texture on the walls. It becomes very difficult to actually figure out where doorways are, where corners, where people could be behind are, and it just becomes really disorientating. What we need to do is keep shader quality on at least high. When I activate that and we come back, you can now see there's almost this shadow as we look down the stairs. I can see the separation, and that will translate over into buildings where we'll be able to see those corners, understand where enemies are, and we'll have such a better time playing on some of those more indoor focused maps. Really important you don't go lower than high on shader quality. So lastly in here is the image effects. Starting with brightness and coloring, I like to leave this on. Just makes the game a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more bright overall, makes the game a little bit more appealing to play. Nothing really to do with FPS or visibility. It's mostly personal preference, but yeah, I'd recommend you leave it on. Motion blur, definitely leave off. Any kind of blur is going to be very bad for visibility. Same goes for vignette. Vignette is the shadowiness around the edge of your screen in certain situations. Definitely want to get rid of that so we have as much brightness at the edges of your periphery as possible. And the same with ADS effect, another setting that is going to hurt visibility overall. And then lastly, contrast intensity. I like to leave this at 100. Having a bit of contrast in this game, it's kind of similar to brightness and coloring, except I think this actually helps visibility to have this on, have a bit more contrast between certain lighting, certain colors. It overall will help your visibility that little bit extra. Before we end the video, I've got a couple of bonus settings tips that don't relate to graphics, but instead relate to gameplay and getting the most out of the game, making things a little bit easier, that I'm just going to cover quickly at the end here. Start off by going into gameplay. You're going to scroll down from the top all the way to user interface, and you're going to turn down the friendly icon size. The friendly icons are everywhere in this game. It doesn't matter how far you are from a friendly, you can still see it, and it gets in your way. It makes it really hard to see enemies sometimes, and it's very distracting. So you can turn this down in here. I typically run this at 0.4. It still allows me to know where friendlies are, but it's less distracting, which is a nice little change. If you want to see the effects of the graphic settings we did earlier, there is an FPS counter in here as well. If you scroll down once again within the UI area down to show FPS, you can turn that on and click apply. There you go. It shows your FPS up here. And finally, I've got for you guys a couple of keybind tweaks that you're definitely going to want to try out. It really helps you out with the gameplay in BattleBit. First one is going to be to do with leaning. By default, if you hold down E, you will lean to the right, like you would like this. And then if you were to hold down Q, you would lean to the left. The problem with having it set up like this is that typically if I'm leaning to the right, I'm probably wanting to move to the right as well. And I'm trying to move right with D as well as lean with E. And that's quite difficult to do with one finger. Same goes for if you were leaning left and you're trying to move left. Pretty difficult. What I do is swap them. Sounds weird, but you can come in here, go to keybinds, look at lean left. I've got lean left on E rather than Q, and vice versa for lean right. What this allows me to do is I can lean right by putting down my left finger, then my ring finger, and then I can move right using both fingers like this. So lean right, lean left, move left. And I've done this in a ton of games, not just BattleBit, but it's become muscle memory for me, and it's made the overall leaning mechanic way more useful. The other change that pretty much everyone recommends is having your healing button or your reviving button on the same keybind as your drag button. By default, your healing is number 3 because that's how you get out your bandages, and dragging is F. All you want to do is come on down to loadout, and where it says first aid, click here. It will say 3 here for you guys. Just change that to F, and what this will now do is it will mean that when you hold F and you drag a dead guy on your team, you'll also be reviving him. It just cuts out that extra key you have to press or having to drag then revive. It just is a far quicker, more useful experience for your whole team. Now, the best thing to do next is to pair everything we've done today with these NVIDIA control panel settings, which are unanimously good for all PC games, not just BattleBit, but go and watch this next, dial them in, and you'll have the smoothest experience possible.